Um, Martin, tell me about your roles and responsibilities as a chairperson of the steering committee of Business for South Africa COVID-19.
Well, Business for South Africa is a virtual platform that was established by Business Unity South Africa and the Black Business Council as a specific targeted response to the pandemic. And last year we were working primarily on economic interventions, but also on labor market issues and a healthcare platform, which was particularly working with the Solidarity Fund on bringing PPE into the country. And people may remember that at that time there was no PPE that could be found in South Africa when we went into hard lockdown in March of last year. At our peak, I think we had about 450 people from business, all working pro bono, everybody leaving their brands, their sharp elbows, their egos outside the door, working with friends and competitors, everybody working virtually. And I think we harnessed a huge amount of energy and I would say patriotism to work in support of trying to make sure that we could deal with what was really, I think we all agreed, an existential threat to the country, and what had really magnified all of our problems. And this year we revitalized the platform specifically to work with government on the vaccination rollout program.
How would you summarize the part that the private sector has played in the biggest vaccine rollout in the country's history?
Yeah, I think it's been extraordinary, unprecedented. Obviously, we're in uncharted waters. We all know the vaccination program is the most important single response we can have to the virus. It's going to deal with issues such as lockdown and returning the economy to full activity, but most importantly, it's going to deal with, hopefully, preventing attacks on people's health and lives and livelihoods. And therefore, we've had to get business from the largest to the smallest subject matter experts to work together in making sure that their expertise can actually bolster capability within government, but also making facilities available, and that's perhaps the most important aspect, so that in the rollout of the vaccine, we could administer as many jabs as quickly as possible to as large a proportion of the population as we can.
When we look at the big corporations, Dis-Chem, Clicks, Discovery come to mind. Have they made a huge difference?
Yeah, they're not the only ones. I mean, it's worthwhile looking at the platforms because obviously there are the Dis-Chems and the Clicks, but also the independent pharmacies are absolutely critical. Doctors and doctors' clinics, not just Discovery, but other medical schemes that have established, if you like, pop-up capability for the next 6 to 9 months, but also occupational health centers and safe within many businesses, either established or to be established. The mining sector, for example, or the retail sector, already had pre-existing clinics that they could mobilize and put at the disposal of the country, not just at the disposal of their own workforce, but more broadly the community at large.
How has the private sector contributed apart from the vaccination sites?
Well, I think in many respects. So I think no conversation would be complete, first of all, without talking about the role the Solidarity Fund has played. That's not the private sector. It's quite independent of government and indeed the private sector. But the private sector has made very significant contributions to the Solidarity Fund, financial contributions as well as, again, in kind. The Solidarity Fund is playing a leading role in the communications campaign, making sure that we can deal with vaccine hesitancy, that we can encourage people to register, that they must turn up on time for their scheduled appointments is absolutely critical countrywide. And the private sector has done that more broadly outside of the Solidarity Fund. We have a huge communications platform that is working with government, with GCIS and the NDOH, to try and advocate the very issues that I've just talked about.
The vaccine rollout has been described as late, slow, and stuttering. What would your reaction be?
So I think it's easy for us to say that, and we're all frustrated at the fact that it hasn't moved quicker and with greater breadth and spread and breadth, if you like, of impact. It's worthwhile remembering that not just in South Africa, but globally, none of us were anticipating a second wave. It caught us all on the hop. That's the first point. The second is that originally we intended to be able to procure significant quantities of AstraZeneca. We weren't going to be able to anticipate a variant emerging in South Africa where the efficacy of AstraZeneca was low. And by the way, even if we had used AstraZeneca, the Serum Institute in India stopped exporting, as we know, because of India's own need to use the vaccination internally within India. And the third is that there are issues that are outside of our control, like, for example, the embargo that the FDA has placed on J&J. We've got 2 million doses of J&J sitting at the Aspen facility in Quebec, which we're not currently able to use. So we had to pivot to Pfizer. And if we remember at the time, Pfizer wasn't necessarily an absolutely key focus because it was a 2-jab dose. There were cold chain requirements. When you think that we started phase 2 on the 17th of May, and we now have capacity to jab 150,000 people per day, we want to get to 250,000 a day. I think that's a good achievement in 3 weeks, frankly. I think there are bound to be teething problems, but I'm confident that if we want to, we can vaccinate the entire adult population by the end of the year.
But there seem to have been unfortunate, even tragic setbacks
that we need to apply our mind to. One is the fact that a lot of people haven't registered on EVDS, despite the fact that we know that that's a precondition to getting the vaccination. In fact, to try and accommodate that, many public sector sites are accommodating effectively walk-in registrations of over 60-year-olds and then vaccinating them. If you look at the statistics coming out of KZN, it's a good example of that. The biggest problem we have at the moment is, frankly, lack of the vaccine. And I've talked about why that is the case. Obviously, Pfizer is continuing to send through significant doses, but J&J, we need to hope that gets released as a matter of urgency. Making sure that we have an aligned and integrated approach, both within government and between government and the private sector and other social partners, is a key focus. And I would like to believe that we've made, again, significant progress in that regard.
Government's aim of having 67% of the relevant population vaccinated by March next year, is it still possible?
Oh, I think it's completely possible. If you think that we're at, as I said, 150,000 doses a day capacity, that's not what we're doing. We're doing 80,000 a day at the moment. I'd like to think we'll be at 100,000 by the beginning of next week. We need to get to 250,000 to 300,000 a day, completely achievable. There's some 2,000 sites in the pipeline already to be approved through the process. That's over 7 million a month. 7 million a month gets us to 67% of the adult population before the end of this year.
That's going to take a tremendous public-private partnership to reach that goal. You really will have to work together.
Well, we are working together. I have to say that we've got 5 work streams. The 5 work streams were agreed with government. B4SA has got dedicated work stream leads, as does government. They're meeting on a daily basis. And we, as the leadership of B4SA, meet with the leadership within government, the NDOH in particular, but including the presidency, at the moment 3 times a week, an hour to an hour and a half each day that we meet. Initially, it was 3 times a day to make sure that we can deal with these teething problems. We have to work in a completely synchronized and integrated manner, exactly as you said. It's not as though the private sector can go and do its own thing. It can't. It is a support process for the government's rollout program.
And what is the logistical expertise that private enterprise brings to the rollout?
Well, if we think about it, many of these enterprises are already in the business of distributing pharmaceuticals. So private hospitals that I didn't mention the first time around, an important platform, doctors' clinics and surgeries, pharmacies, either the large ones or the independent pharmacies. So when we're talking about non-traditional healthcare providers like the medical schemes, they can bring in, to the extent they don't already have them, the specialist skills. And we've got a team that is looking at logistics, a team that's looking at procurement, and of course a team that is looking at making sure that we have site readiness for the administration of the vaccine. At the moment, the private sector is primarily working at ensuring that they vaccinate those that are covered by medical schemes or are in employment where the employer wants to administer the vaccine. But we expect to get to a situation where EVDS will direct people to be vaccinated to the site that is most appropriate, efficient, and convenient, both in terms of availability of stock as well as in terms of access for the people to be vaccinated, which means you'll see a crossover in due course. People in the private schemes actually going to public sector sites to be vaccinated and vice versa.
We've been told that the private sector's champing at the bit to ramp up the vaccinations, But there's a roadblock with red tape. Is that true?
Yeah, I wouldn't call it red tape. There's a regulatory process that has to be gone through. So every single site has to ensure that it is curated, that it is registered, and that it is licensed. And we would expect that. It's no different for a pharmacy or indeed for a private or public hospital, whether it's an occupational health site at a place of work, a mine, for example, or whether it's a pharmacy. They need to queue in a system. So the biggest problem that we've got, of course, is a constraint on the number of applications that can be processed at any moment in time. That is true, but I think it's been very significantly accelerated over the past few weeks.
There are reports of people over 60 arriving at private vaccination sites being turned away because of the government's guidelines. Is that true?
Yes, that is indeed true. So the government issued those guidelines over the weekend. I think that they're being clarified over the coming few days. Government, which has limited fiscal space, is trying to ensure that it can maximize the utilization of public sector facilities for those that are not covered by medical insurance. So those that fit into that category and go without being scheduled to go, so unscheduled walk-ins, if you like, to a private sector site, there are limited circumstances under which those who administer the vaccines there will get repaid. So that is indeed true. There has been an exception made for the over 80s, so people can use their discretion to a limited amount. But if you think about it rationally, if we're going to be vaccinating 250,000 people a day, for the most part, they need to go to where they're being sent to get vaccinated rather than turn up wherever they like, because we've got to make sure we've got the right quantity of vaccines at the right sites, accessible by those who've been directed, as I said, to those sites. And I think, therefore, that we do need to institute some discipline into the process. I can understand that everybody is very anxious and wants to get vaccinated as quickly as possible.
Martin, I would guess that the systems and supplies will really be tested when we move on to phase 2, people under 60.
Yes, I think that's exactly right. So there's 5.5 million people who are over 60. There were about 500,000 healthcare workers that weren't vaccinated under the Sankaree program, and only 2 million or so of that 6 million have registered. So that's 40% have registered. We've got to ramp that up. And as you said before, we don't expect everybody to be vaccinated. We would like everybody to be vaccinated. And the over 60s are clearly the most vulnerable age group. But as you say, when we open it up to below the over 60s, the over 50s, the over 40s, then we need to make sure our systems are working. So I think we've got about 6 or 7 weeks to make sure that everything is working before we open up to the population more broadly.
We're looking at the third wave and sadly more of our population passing away. How confident are you that the vaccination drive will succeed?
Yeah, I'm very confident that the vaccination drive will succeed, but whether we're going to be able to do it ahead of the third wave having the very pernicious effect you're saying on people's lives and livelihoods, the healthcare system, is very worrying. And of course, the third wave coinciding with winter, I think we've seen a very significant increase in the number of people who are falling sick with flu at exactly the same time. And we've got an interesting and a challenging conundrum, which is that on the one hand, we want people not to congregate, and on the other hand, we're going to have lots of people queuing to get the vaccine, which is another reason for having real order and discipline in the process.
Otherwise, they become super spreader sites
themselves. And there's nothing worse than, as you say, a super spreader site, let alone the fact that we could have people queuing to get the vaccination becoming spreaders in and of themselves.
What's it been like for you personally, Martin, being involved in trying to fight the pandemic?
Yeah, I think it's been an extraordinary experience because, first of all, the amount of goodwill, expertise, patriotism that has been unleashed has been, in my experience, unprecedented. You know, people working for weeks and months on end with others they've never physically met, they've never come across in their daily lives, they might never do so again. That's within business. And then working, as I said, hand in glove with government, as well as with our other social partners. There's a lot of learning that has had to be done. So I found it not so much frustrating as invigorating. I believe that we all know that we can make a real and material difference. We can save lives, we can save livelihoods, we can stop the pressure on our healthcare system. And I think it'll teach us a lesson in terms of real cooperation and partnership that can serve as a template for all manner of forms of partnership into the future.
Martin, you optimistic that we'll get to vaccinating the under 60s in 6 to 7 weeks?
Yeah, I'm very confident about that. If we're already at 150,000 jabs per day capacity today, then there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to vaccinate all of the over 60 population that make themselves available to be vaccinated by the end of July. So that's 6 or 7 weeks away.
Martin, vaccines, setting up sites, a huge number of healthcare workers required and other personnel. What is this costing the country?
Well, we had estimated originally, you'll remember, as a country, there could be over 20 billion rand for the country at large. I think those numbers have been significantly revised down to about 12 or 13 billion rand. National Treasury has made it clear they've already budgeted for it. It's a national good that effectively underwrite the cost of the vaccination for anybody who needs to be vaccinated, recovering clearly from those who are covered by medical schemes. And if employers wish to pay for employees who are not covered, then of course the government will accept that, I'm sure. So we do have the funds. The only real cost that we need to consider, of course, is the cost of administration. So when you go and you get jabbed and the cost of the vaccination, the needle, the PPE that is worn, the doctor's rooms, or the amortized cost of the facilities concerned, that's 70 rand, as we know, plus VAT. I think it's been properly costed. We're comfortable that it will withstand scrutiny. We need to make sure that none of the corruption that was as pervasive as it was in the context of the PPE rollout can occur here. I'm much more confident that we've taken the necessary steps in this particular case.